Welcome back to Science, Chapter 2, Lesson 2, How Are Cells Classified, Part 2. Do you think that a cell can carry out its life functions efficiently if a cell was larger? Why or why not do you think the size of a cell, whether it's bigger or smaller, could impact how it performs its functions? Write what you think on your sheet of paper. Individual cells, they actually grow. As the cell grows, they get food and exchange gases by diffusion. Water enters and exits the cells through osmosis. The cell wastes are removed through the cell membrane. And the larger the cell, the more nutrients it needs. Just like you, the bigger you get, the more nutrients you need. If the volume of a cell increases faster than the surface area of its membrane, then there comes a point when it is just too big. Its need for materials increases faster than the ability to supply those materials. It no longer has space on the cell membrane for all the work to happen that is needed to support the cell. Not enough nutrients can get in and not enough waste can get out. So in other words, if the cell on the inside, it just gets too big, it can't get all the nutrients that it needs. God has designed cells to be very small because that is how they are most efficient. So let's take a look at this slide. You can see on this slide the first little section where it says atom, amino acid, protein, virus, chloroplast. Most bacteria, plant and animal cells, those are all things that can be seen, but only if you have an electron microscope, which is a very, very strong and powerful microscope. Then if you have a light microscope, which is one that's not quite as powerful, you can see some chloroplasts, some bacteria, plant cells, the human egg, and some frog eggs. So you still need a microscope in order to see it, but it is easier to see. Now, when we talk about things that you can see with the human eye, that's when we get into things like the frog egg, ants, mice, ostrich eggs, roses, humans, blue whales, and so on. So cells on this list are something that you would need to have an electron microscope on to see because they're so small, because that's the way that they are most effective. So let's do some review questions to make sure you understand what we're talking about so far. Question number 1. What is surface area? Surface area is the total area of all the faces of a solid object. Okay, so it's what's covering like the skin of an object. Question number 2. As the surface area of a cell increases, what happens to the overall volume of the cell? The volume, or what's inside, is going to increase much more as the surface area increases. So as one's increasing, the other is increasing. But remember, volume is inside, so that's going to get larger quicker. Question number 3. What are some advantages several small cells have over one large cell? Remember, God designed cells to be small. So small cells can take in nutrients and release waste faster because it has a higher surface area to volume ratio. So the surface area, the outside, is larger than the volume, or what's on inside. So it's able to get the nutrients and release the waste much faster, making it work even faster than this bigger one. Now, remember that cells can be classified as either prokaryotes or eukaryotes. Another way to classify cells is by the function or the job that they perform.
We've mentioned a lot about specialized cells. Specialized plant cells, specialized animal cells, so many kinds of specialized cells, it's going to get a bit crowded here. But have you ever wondered, how do they get specialized? How does a neuron or a muscle cell in your body have the structure and function they have? I mean, can you imagine if they had to switch jobs for a day? that wouldn't go so well. They're so specialized for the function they perform. Well, this video is going to talk about how cells differentiate into other cells, which basically means how cells become specialized. Remember that many multicellular organisms, like a plant or you, well, these organisms come from a fertilized egg cell. Let's take a look at a human fertilized egg, otherwise known as a zygote. Well, that zygote divides to make more cells. And more cells? Oh, look, it's a morula. And more cells? Oh, look, it's a blastocyst now. You know, the problem is, if the cells just keep dividing, if you remember from our mitosis video, that makes identical cells. Well, that's great for growth, and so dividing is definitely going to happen, but that alone is not going to result in different specialized cells with different specialized functions. There's something else that will be happening for that. So let's take a look at that in a bit of detail. We're going to pause here, the blastocyst. Notice it has stem cells, and these stem cells, they're amazing. See, they're not differentiated yet. They're not specialized. They're like blank slates. They don't have a special structure. They don't have a special job. They can become any type of body cell. Now, a reminder about body cells in your body. They all, with a few exceptions, contain all of your DNA. So neurons and muscle cells in your body, they don't have different DNA. They use different parts of your DNA. Genes are regulated, which means the genes can be turned on and off. That's important to understand because that's a big part of how these stem cells are going to specialize. Stem cells will activate certain genes in the process of differentiating into different types of cells. Transcription factors are major key players here. They're typically, but not always, proteins, and they determine which areas of the DNA code will get transcribed into mRNA. Now, that mRNA can eventually be used to make specific proteins that can impact what a cell is going to look like and what a cell is going to do. That means transcription factors have a major role in determining which genes are expressed in a cell. Because a cell that's going to become a skin cell is going to have different areas of genes expressed than a cell that's going to become a stomach cell. There are both internal and external cues for stem cells, which can involve these transcription factors. Examples? Okay, an example of an internal cue could be transcription factors present in the cytoplasm of the original starting zygote cell, which will eventually be present in the cells that come from it. Now, the specific location of the stem cell within the developing embryo can matter because the transcription factors available in different areas of the developing embryo can differ in quantity and type, which could impact what a stem cell differentiates into. External cues could involve cell signaling from other cells next to it. External cues can even be environmental effects like temperature. There's still a lot of research in this area, and we can't wait to see what scientists discover about this in the next decade. So, stem cells are the unspecialized, undifferentiated cells that can become other cells in your body. But not all stem cells are found in a developing embryo. Stem cells can also be found in your body as well, like your muscles, skin, liver, bone marrow, just to name a few. These are often called somatic stem cells. To give some relevance to this, it's likely you've heard of bone marrow transplants before. Well, bone marrow transplants actually involve transplanting a portion of healthy bone marrow, which does contain bone marrow stem cells, with the idea that those donor stem cells can help regenerate different types of blood cells, since bone marrow is like a blood cell making machine. It contains stem cells that differentiate into different types of blood cells. Many, but not all, of the somatic stem cells that are found in your body are considered to be multipotent. That means they can become many types of cells, but not as many as the embryonic stem cells. So after talking about these stem cells, why the heavy focus on them right now in research? Well, one reason, of many, is that these cells have the ability to differentiate into other cells, and therefore they could be used to help regenerate organs or tissues that are damaged from a disease or an accident. There are two important issues to consider, however. One is the ethical issue, especially if considering embryonic stem cells. The ethical issue is significant because the extraction of embryonic stem cells results in the demise of the embryo. One point consistently debated is the potential benefits offered in embryonic stem cell research versus the onset of personhood of human embryos. A second issue is that organ or tissue developed from stem cells that didn't originate from that person will carry the risk of organ or tissue rejection, possibly similar to what you could get with donated organs or tissue. But here's something promising. Some research shows that somatic stem cells from your own body may actually be able to develop into more types of cells than what people first thought. In fact, it was discovered that some somatic stem cells can be induced to go back into a pluripotent state. They're called induced pluripotent stem cells. That means a person's own somatic stem cells from their own body could potentially be induced into a pluripotent state with the potential that they could differentiate into tissues or organs that the person may need. Theoretically, this could be an alternative to waiting for an organ or tissue donor, as well as lower the chances for organ tissue rejection, since the organ or tissue would have originated from the person's own cells. We encourage you to keep up with the topic of stem cells. To stay educated on this topic, the understanding of these undifferentiated cells is likely to advance in the near future. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Most prokaryote cells are unicellular and do not perform specialized functions. But remember, all life processes must still be able to be performed in that one cell. Most eukaryotic organisms are multicellular. Each of these cells in a eukaryote organism has the exact same instructions stored in its nucleus, which is a set of instructions about how to maintain life. Some might think that this would mean that all cells are identical, but that is not the case. There are hundreds of different types of cells that are all specialized to do different jobs. These are specialized cells that have different structures that are related to the tasks that they perform. So here on this slide, we can see a bunch of different types of specialized cells. The very first image on the far left is of a nerve, then we have a muscle, and then we have a plant cell, and then we have red blood cells in that far one on the right. So each one of these is different, but that is because God has designed them to perform a specific function. Let's take a look at a few examples of specialized cells. The first one we're going to look at is red blood cells. These red blood cells are the ones that are in your blood, that are carrying your blood throughout your body. Red blood cells are flexible and they are disc-like, as you can see in this image. This flexibility allows the cells to squeeze through the narrow places, particularly where your blood veins are a little bit more thin compared to some of your others that are more wider, as you can see in your arm. Both sides of a red blood cell are concave, which means they kind of tilt in. The concave shape results in a greater surface area, which allows greater exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this cell's shape helps to get the oxygen and carbon dioxide through your body faster. The next specialized cell we're going to look at is root hair cells, such as the roots. If you look at a root of a plant, it has little hairs. That's what we're looking at. These are specialized cells on plants' roots. They have long, narrow, hair-like structures that extend between the soil particles in order to reach water and minerals. Their shape provides more surface area for water and minerals to move in and out of the cell, very similar to the red blood cells, but the red blood cells are moving throughout your body. These are not. They're designed to squeeze in between the soil. And the last example we're going to look at is the coral cell in a sea sponge. Cells here line the open channels of a sponge. They have whip-like structures that help to push the water through the channels. The cells are also sticky, which helps them to trap food particles moving within the water.
When you think of the term specialized cell, what do you think of? Well, when I was younger, I used to imagine this super cell that was really important and did all of these special tasks. I don't know, like some kind of special agent cell. Yeah, I kind of had that wrong. A specialized cell is a cell that has a structure that suits its function. Many cells have really different functions, and so their structure can vary greatly. When you see a lot of pictures of plant cells and animal cells, you might start to think that this is how they all look. All the animal cells and all the plant cells, they might start to kind of look the same in diagrams. Well, plant cells and animal cells definitely have structures that are unique to them. We have that covered in our Intro to Cells video. But because cells have different functions, depending on their cell type and the activated genes that they have, cells are going to have different structures too. They're going to be specialized. Now, the process for cell differentiation, which really explains how cells become specialized, it's a topic for another one of our videos. This video is going to focus on examples of specialized cells so that you can discover how different they really are and why that's so important. We can't go through every plant and animal cell, obviously, but we can give you some great examples. Let's start with plant cells. Plant cells can have all kinds of specialization, depending on their function. I mean, you can just look at a cross-section of a leaf and see all kinds of specialization. At the top here, also often at the bottom of the cross-section too, you can have a waxy cuticle layer, a protective layer that covers plant epidermal cells. Plant epidermal cells, among their many functions, are important in forming a boundary from the outside. They help keep plants from losing precious water. And epidermal cells can be up here on the top of the leaf. That's the upper epidermis, and they can also be down here on the bottom, the lower epidermis. And depending on the type of plant and where it might be living, the layer could be just one cell thick or several cells thick, especially if the plant lives somewhere where it's going to have to protect against environment extremes. Many plant epidermal cells do not even contain chloroplasts because, for a lot of plants, that's not a main function for epidermal cells. Guard cells are specialized epidermal cells that have an important job of controlling the opening and closing of stomata, which are pores in the leaf. They tend to be at the bottom of the leaf, but as always, there are some exceptions. See, you want stomata to be open to let the exchange of gases through, but you don't want them to be open if you don't have enough water in the plant because water can get out. There's a balance. We have a video on that. Here are more specialized epidermal cells. Trichomes. Now for plants, these can be plant hair cells, and maybe not like what you were thinking. These epidermal cells can be hair-shaped, and they have all kinds of different functions. Some of them are protective and can secrete toxic substances to protect against insects that might want to eat them. Some act like light reflectors to help protect plants that live in really hot areas that get a lot of direct sunlight. Now, a side note on trichomes, my favorite plant of all time is the sundew. It's a carnivorous plant that I actually used to grow like crazy when I was a kid until it got a little too crazy, but I digress. Anyway, this plant actually has trichome cells that produce enzymes that digest insects because it's a carnivorous plant. Yep. Still in this leaf cross-section, look at this layer. This is the mesophyll. Here are the palisade mesophyll cells. These cells are really important for capturing light, so they're specialized for this task. Guess what they have a lot of? Chloroplast. Lots of chloroplast, making glucose from the sun, food for the plant. Underneath it, take a look at these spongy mesophyll cells. These cells that make up this area are pretty loosely packed. They have irregular shapes. They can have chloroplasts, but in many plants they may not have as many chloroplasts as the palisade mesophyll cells because in many plants the spongy mesophyll cells don't do as much photosynthesis as the palisade mesophyll cells do. Their irregular shape combined with loose organization gives space for gas exchange, which you need for photosynthesis. This vein here contains the xylem and the phloem. We talk about these vessels in another clip, but the cells that make up these vessels are specialized for transporting water in the xylem or products from photosynthesis in the phloem. Okay, so we just saw a few examples of specialized plant cells. Let's take a look at specialized animal cells. How about the animal cells in your human body? Let's take red blood cells, RBCs, erythrocytes, so many names. They contain hemoglobin in their cytoplasm, which is a protein that helps them carry oxygen. They have a disc shape, which maximizes surface area for carrying oxygen. And they are also fairly flexible, which is helpful when squeezing through small capillaries. Here's a fun fact. When they are mature, they actually don't have a nucleus, or a lot of other organelles. Again, it's all about maximizing that space for carrying oxygen. By just the name, you might hear white blood cells and think that they are very similar to red blood cells, just a different color. But in reality, they are extremely different in structure and function. There are many different kinds of white blood cells. Some of them are classified as granulocytes, which means a special part of their structure is that they have these granules in their cytoplasm, which when released can aid in destroying pathogens. Many white blood cell types can have an irregular shape, with a structure that allows them to engulf foreign particles. How about muscle cells? Many muscle cells can have more mitochondria than many other body cell types because of their need for ATP energy. Now, depending on how their overlapping filaments are arranged, they can be considered striated, which basically means a striped appearance, or not striated. Their shape differs too. Smooth muscle has a shape that kind of tapers at each end, often described as a spindle shape. Skeletal muscle cells are long and cylinder-shaped and often bundled. They can have a lot of nuclei too, which is definitely interesting. If you're curious about why, it has to do with the fact that these cells develop from myoblasts, which have fused together, so to the Google to find out more. Now, cardiac muscle cells have many similarities to skeletal muscle, but because they have such an important function with the beating of the heart, they have to be in sync. They have what are called intercalated discs, and those join them and help carry the signal to maintain the heartbeat. Cardiac muscle cells are often branched, and they too can have more than one nucleus. Well, with our limited time, we want to mention one more specialized animal cell, neurons. Oh boy, where do we begin? Neurons are the cells that can sense a stimulus and transmit signals. Common places to find them include your brain or your spinal cord. These things can be over 1 meter long in humans. 1 meter. Microscopic still, but wow, just look at this beautiful cell. Its structure is specialized for signal conduction. In the neuron, structures called dendrites receive impulses, and axons transmit the impulse either to another neuron or to a cell that it's targeting, like one of the muscle cells we just mentioned. By the way, this transmitting of the signal, which can occur in an event called the action potential, it's going to have to be in another video. The action potential is just a beautiful, amazing process, and these cells are specialized for it. Whew, okay, that's a lot of specialized plant and animal cells. And that's just a few selected examples. One thing to keep in mind is that these specialized cells, they can make up specialized tissues in both plants and animals, and they function together. Now, more about tissues in our biological levels of organization video. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.